So, I'm glad you all made it to the end, and we will reward you at the end. You all come on stage for some beer and pretzels and some other goodies. But we're thrilled to have Ralph back. We missed you last year. Rob Lee filled in admirably, but we're glad to have you back. So we have.
I wouldn't go thrilled, but yeah, it's good. It's good having you.
I didn't know that.
So Ralph's here, Zach's here, and those of you that have come many times, I always kind of start out with the same question. And we've done a lot here for 3 days. We've talked about a lot of things, and I'd like to know maybe what we're not talking about that we should, or what we're not paying enough attention that we should. Zach, what do you think it is this year?
Well, we've talked about it in past years, but this year there was almost no mention of AI in any of its forms. And I know that across the U.S. government, there's been a lot of activity, and about activity in progress. But we've had all sorts of, there's a joint AI center in DoD. There's a new AI technology office in DOE. There's laws that are being proposed to put $50 billion in there because we really don't understand it, I think, is the problem. And for us at the lab, I think we understand that eventually people are going to come and ask us, what can adversaries do to our critical infrastructure in AI? So all of our research is going to be based on understanding kind of the limits of protection and of exploitation of AIs and how they apply to critical infrastructure.
And why do you have any ideas why that is? Why aren't we hearing about it?
Well, it's hard to do. It's not a garage thing. And of course, the other thing that I'm concerned about is, we heard about test effects payloads. How do we test our AIs, comparatively either against one another or against an infrastructure? Some of the test beds to actually make sure that it works and that we're giving good advice are going to be hard to make. So, and I also think that a lot of people think the AI, that we've solved it, right? But other people know that there's just, a next generation coming.
Yeah, I don't think we're close to solving it. I was surprised. I solicited, about half the sessions we get are ones that come in just blind. We have the CFP, they come in, and the others I'm trying to ping as many people as I can. Do you have anything? Have you seen anything? And I didn't get anything really on any cloud-based services, whether it's related to predictive maintenance or like what Digital Ghost, where GE showed last year, the idea of identifying problems in the process and fixing the values to what they should be as opposed to what the sensor was, or even, I didn't get much about even remote operations in the cloud. Mm-hmm. Ralph, do you think that, is it too early to be talking about that, or are we missing the boat by not talking about it?
Probably, but I think it's definitely going to take off. And I'll tell you why. Because presently we are experiencing a fundamental shift in our field. And this is the shift to more data-driven models. So we are in the process of introducing so much technology now, which is a good thing, I believe, that we will have much more data than ever before. And you all know that so far, all over the years, we have been trying to paint the risk and the threats, etc. And this, in the future, we no longer need to do that because we can point to the real data. And that data certainly asks for processing. So my prediction is that OT security will turn into a data science. In other words, in a couple of years, you will have so much data that it's simply begging for AI algorithms. So that is something that I see happen. The other thing, and why I'm saying, well, probably it's going to take a while, because what we see so far doesn't really, the results that we're seeing, the patterns that we see in this data, they don't ask for AI for a simple reason. The results are so clear. Once that you actually look at basic data from asset inventories or from detection products, you see all those hundreds of thousands of vulnerabilities. That is something that you don't need an AI algorithm to tell you. One other thing, you see all the thousands of Windows boxes that are still running Windows 7. Well, there is no AI that can help you with that. And that's the reason why I think AI will have its place, but it might just take another couple of years until we manage to get the groundwork done, the obvious stuff that doesn't require any fancy algorithms.
Well, Dale, I also think that the conference has been going on so long that we're finally starting to see technology arcs. So, say maybe digital twins, or however you want to call it, digital ghosts, was a nascent technology, and in 2 or 3 years we'll start seeing papers on the maturity of digital twins, and then 3 or 4 years after that we'll start seeing how it's a displaced technology. Oh, digital twins are no longer. And I think whether it's some of the initial anomaly detection that we were seeing in the early days of the first S4s have come back and forth, and some new ideas are coming through. So I think wait a year or so and you'll probably see those digital twins and a few others come back through.
Okay. Ralph, what are we not talking about that we should be talking about?
Well, we don't talk about that big pink elephant in the room. We haven't talked about that so far. That big pink elephant reads, no sophisticated OT attacks since 2 years. So last time I was here, we were just talking about the Triconex attack. And since then, we haven't seen a sophisticated OT attack. And I think that's worth discussing, in my opinion, for a couple of reasons. But if you are like me, you are really surprised about this. In a way, I also felt bad for Dale, because he's always keeping these spots open to the last minute for something to happen, but it didn't. So he had to fill it with probably more boring content.
I said that since I left that spot open, nothing's happened, so we're a good protection.
Yeah, sure, you can also see it that way. So just leave those spots open. But I mean, seriously, why did it surprise me? Because we have this situation with Iran ongoing, just as an example. And now we are talking about an adversary who has on its official agenda death to America. So I don't know about you, but I was actually a little bit worried that things now might break loose, and I was already ducking under, and then a couple of days there I realized nothing's going to happen. Yeah, and that really surprised me.
If they had known you were coming here, they would have done something. So you should just...
So that really surprised me. The best that they, or worst that they did, was a web defacement of some government website that nobody knew existed in the first place. And that really surprised me, because if you remember all that talk from the Ayatollah after Stuxnet, they're educating the youth, the Iranian youth, and they're going to strike back, blah, blah, blah. And so instead of that big bang that I was certainly afraid of, we just saw that. Yeah, that was it. Yeah. And so that surprised me. In other words,
don't piss anybody off here, right? And then go back to Germany.
It told me.
Are you saying I dare you?
It told me that the Ayatollah has no clothes. So all that talk, and they just couldn't pull it off.
I don't know you.
And certainly I'm happy about that. I'm definitely happy. It just gives me the feeling, and again, to get serious, that we might readjust our threat intelligence, because I think everybody in this room remembers the government spokespeople who warned about serious retaliation and the critical infrastructure, and none of that happened. And my opinion is it didn't happen because they don't have the capability. They certainly have the motivation, but apparently they don't have the capability.
Well, so on day one, Dan Geer said that he was a professional paranoid. Yep. And I like to now say that I'm an amateur Pollyanna, right? So this is all good stuff. Things will be fine. But no, this hopefully has given people a chance to retrench, and Ralph and I were saying earlier, hopefully it doesn't give those people who we've been raising awareness with over the past 20 years to now say, hey, look, it's really calm now. We don't need to worry about doing those things anymore. So I don't think it's that. I don't know why we haven't seen some of the big attacks, but once again, we're being attacked in different ways. None of the very either high impact or new techniques or procedures, like the Triton Trisis attack or something else have come to light. There's still things happening, and I think they'll continue to.
But I think the other thing for this audience in particular is that you should consider that decision makers, business decision makers, are getting aware of this fact. And if your narrative is, if your sales pitch is still always punching on the threat and the risk and this, APT this, and APT that, and what could happen. You know, we're engaging in what-if games, in mind games. So this is getting more and more problematic. And I think it's worth reconsidering our message and our argument for executives in both in the government and in the private industry.
Well, this is something though related to. I'll get you in a second, but believe it or not, I mean, I make enough people mad with some of my articles and tweets and that, but I actually hold back a lot. And you know, I say, is this truly helpful? Does this need to be said? And one of the areas that I held back is directly related to this. After you know, the event in Iran that the U.S. caused, and all these warnings, I think there was one of the companies put out a threat thing saying these 8 characters are attacking the electric sector. And, you know, gave them, you know, they have these fancy names and they talked about what they did. And I was wondering, first part, I said, well, is this helpful? You know, has this changed? Is this something new, or is this just because now everyone's at heightened level that it's a good time to put this out? But then on the flip side, and the reason I didn't put it out is, one of the things you learn in marketing is that you get tired of the message much faster than the message is absorbed. So maybe it's a good thing when people are paying attention to actually say this, because they might actually listen to it, the people that hadn't heard it. So I was really kind of torn when you talk about this threat, you know, the boogeyman out there that we keep saying is out there and nothing happening. I really don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing to say that. You wanted to jump in. What were you going to say about that?
Well, you know, you talked about, you know, the awareness of executives, et cetera, and you had mentioned earlier in your talk on day one about giving the message to executives much better. And I know in the past 10 or 15 years at PCSF, ICS, JWG, anything, there's always a session on committing, talking to executives about the cybersecurity you know, needs. And I think that we're now at the point where we're actually getting very good at that. We're good enough now that we're being forced to compete against the other initiatives that are potentially going to make money for an enterprise. So spend $1 million on a firewall, or spend $1 million on a new initiative that might make $10 million. And we haven't been able to show the trail of either, you know, the $10 million, you know, competition. So it used to be that the forward-thinking executives would trust the CISO and say, yes, you're going to get your money. Now we're competing, and we have to, you know, step up our value propositions even more to be able to compete against the other initiatives in a corporation.
Well, let me throw out a different topic, and then, as always, I encourage you guys to, I talk a lot up here, so I want to hear what you have to say, but let me throw this topic out. I started out talking about this is a great environment right now to be in ICS security. There's so many jobs, lots of companies hiring. I was hearing numbers at the Cabana sessions that just blew my mind. You know, this company has an OT consulting staff of 18. This one is up to 32. These have 57. I mean, just things that 5 years ago, if you had 5 people, you were one of the largest companies in the, you know, in this space. So it's a great market. Everyone's hiring. Is that going to continue? Are we at a blip and we're going to go down as soon as the economy goes down, or are we just starting and it's going to be double and triple in the future?
Well, I would think it's, I see the picture a little bit more nuanced. If you look at our particular sector, if you look at cybersecurity products and services, apparently this is growing very much, up to the point that I cannot find employees. So if you're looking for a job, approach me. But the other thing is in the private industry, as I see it with customers, it's not that much. So I still see a lot of very large companies, and they are maintaining a workforce of probably 1 or 2 people focusing on OT securities specifically. And let me underline that, because that's really the differentiator. If you tell me, yes, we have 10 people working on OT security, my next question would be full-time or part-time? So this is what I've seen in my consulting business so many times, that people who have OT security in their job description as just one item in that whole list it's not really going to happen. So my criterion is always how many people do you have working on the problem full time, because that really makes a difference. Why? Because apparently if you have some, let's just say somebody in engineering, and so he's also tasked with OT security, apparently those engineering or maintenance jobs always are more pressing. Yes, there are no more pressing, because in OT, it's a different situation when you look at the deadlines. If you are lucky, your organization is very strict on auditing and reporting, so they have reporting deadlines that you are just supposed to meet. If they don't have that, you might just find yourself having not spent more than 3 hours in the month on OT security, and this tells me then that it's more for show. So this is how I see the picture, and in respect to our market, I think it's a very good indicator that we are just building up the workforce, because it's definitely needed. So we need more people to make it happen.
Well, so I definitely agree with that. And there's two sides to the coin, I think. I spend a lot of time talking about the workforce, and we talk about the size of the companies, the number of people that are really amazing us, but the numbers that come out about, what the cybersecurity workforce in general is going to need to be in the next 10 years, the numbers are staggering, and I think there's no way we can just grow the workforce that way. So we're going to have to do better engineering of secure systems. It's going to be an all-hands-on-deck approach. Every person should be a cybersecurity person, the same way we all kind of think about safety. At the same time, the universities are starting to come around a little bit more and starting to develop more curricula that are building the types of skills for people that we can go hire and do these things. We're getting more co-ops with industries. A lot of the people that come here, the industrial partners, are hiring young people or bringing them in their junior and senior years in college. So there are a lot of different ways, but I don't think it's going to go away. As we look at the integration of renewables, new energy sources, things like that. We're seeing power engineers, especially those that understand cybersecurity, are kind of the next missing peg on all of this. And we're working with all sorts of people to try and come up with new ways to bring those in. Who's going to integrate those renewables into the grid? Who's going to work on the next generation of nuclear reactors, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, there's a lot of opportunity. It's growing, and once again, I'll be a Pollyanna. I see a lot of things that are making this workable, but we're still in a little bit of a hole.
Yeah, I guess the only thing I heard there that I'd maybe take issue with a little bit is I'm hoping we don't think we're going to add a lot of security requirements to the entire workforce in operations.
No, I just think that it has to be part of our DNA. Right?
But you say like the safety culture, everyone has to care about safety, and then I want security to rely as little on most of my staff as possible. Yeah. I mean, maybe I have to get them to do a couple of things, but I would like us to try to find ways to remove the burden of security from them.
Well, you got to have dedicated workforce. I believe everybody in this room has heard it so often that security is everybody's responsibility, right? You have heard that already. Depending how long you are in the game, you will also have heard, well, safety is everybody's responsibility. And then there are other people in a different environment who will tell you sales is everybody's responsibility. And I tell you what, this is something I cannot shoulder. So if I'm an engineer responsible for designing, let's just say, production lines for a manufacturing company, and on top of that I'm also responsible for security, for safety, for sales and marketing and customer relationships, that's just nonsense. So that's just the illusion with all that awareness talk, etc., that through some magic you would empower all these employees to act together, all together towards that same goal. It is just nonsense. It's an illusion. Therefore, we still need these dedicated people who devise processes and procedures that are actionable for the people, the guys and boys with the boots on the ground, and not interfere with their line of work. That's the highest priority, in my opinion.
Well, and your idea of basically transparent, trustworthy or resilient systems is where we'd like to go, but I'm not that big a Pollyanna.
Yeah. Well, you always come out here with a list. What else do you have on that list that you want to talk about?
Well, we've talked about the workforce things.
I think we are done, so let's just have a beer.
Well, I always have a lot of things I want to ask you guys, but
keep asking.
okay. So we had a few sessions this time on more the executive side of it. We had Moody's out here talking about cyber risk ratings, a woman talking about board of directors' legal responsibilities today and in the future, and so on. Do you think that we're going to get to the point where we actually are communicating well with the executives, where we're actually not just trying to scare them, but we're trying to give them something that they can sign up to that's a little more tangible than just, you got to do this or something bad's going to happen?
Well, I pulled Lisa Soto aside as she was leaving and talked to her about some of the things that boards want to know. And there's an organization, the National Association of Corporate Directors, and they came out with a nice guidebook on questions that board members should ask CISOs and others. And it's really kind of different of the things we want to talk to them about, because they're more concerned about risk to the organization, overall business health, et cetera. And I think it kind of pays us to go and look at some of those things and see what's really on their mind. Once again, when we want to try and get that next investment in security, we need to really see it from their lens. And it's really a very different kind of thing. As a matter of fact, CMU developed a certification for people on boards to learn about IT risk. And I think a lot of us looking at it would maybe smirk or chuckle a little bit, but realizing that that's what the people who are really concerned about the businesses and their viability, and similarly maybe at the government levels as well, we need to pay attention to what they're concerned about and make sure we can translate one to the other.
Well, in my opinion, I see still way too much manufactured drama. And that is something that we have learned doesn't sell very well. I also, a lot of totally naive pitches. So, and you have all seen that. For example, last year, cyber breaches cost the United States, let's just say, $50 billion. And so the implied message is, well, why don't we just spend $49.999 billion on cybersecurity? So just give us that money. And that's so naive that I never understand why this type of advertisement is still used. So this is something that is not overly persuasive for business decision makers who live in the framework of risk. This is something that some salespeople obviously don't get. You don't need to explain risk to a CEO. This is what they do all day long. But what you have to understand is your risk, your cyber risk, is just one tiny blip on their radar, because they have other risks. They might think about the acquisition of a new company. They might think about the risk of being acquired by another company. So that is all stuff going on. And now you come with your tiny little cyber risk that you cannot substantiate. So you're in a very weak situation when you cannot back up your argument with some hard facts.
Yeah, but I think you're making my point, though. We need to be able to learn that, because the cyber risk is not a really little tiny risk. And when they're packing their box on the way out,
it in a court of law.
Yeah. Well, but someone say, why didn't they tell me about this stuff before?
Yeah, certainly. And you know how it goes. So it all starts with some fancy PowerPoint graphics. You got to have some fancy chart. And if that chart really reflects empiric reality, I think then you're in a much better position to make your case.
When I start out preparing to figure out what I'm going to say the first 15 minutes of the conference, I'll usually send an email out to a number of people and say, and the question I ask this year is, what happened in 2019? Where did we make real progress as a community in 2019? What is different about January 1, 2020 that wasn't true in January 1, 2019? And the answers this year were very underwhelming. I mean,
obviously we stopped a whole bunch of cyber attacks.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, as I thought about it, and it was a question earlier, I think the biggest thing that I can say we accomplished as a community in 2019 is I think we grew the community. I think that we started from a small level. I see a pretty substantial increase in 2019 in the number of people doing this as a percentage basis. But rather than argue about 2019, I guess my question would be, what should be the metric if we're here January 1, 2021. How do we measure success as a community?
Before we go there, I would like to also share a view about 2019, because I think you're underselling what we have achieved here as a community. For me, it was a very positive sign to see the vendor side growing so large. And that was something that I did not expect. So now we have around 30 OT security vendors, I would guess. Apparently, all of them or most of them are doing quite well. They're hiring. And again, that is looking back, that is kind of a luxury. Because a couple of years ago, the few vendors that we had were, Eric Byrus selling his Tofino firewall. We had Innominate selling their firewall, and we had Industrial Defender, and that was pretty much it. I mean, if you discount the security offerings from vendors or from the automation vendors, which in my opinion didn't really hit the mark. And now look at 2019, look at the Cabana sessions yesterday, you have all these booths. This is something that I did not expect in 2019, and I view that certainly as progress, because now as an asset owner, you have a whole lot of good options to choose from, and you didn't have that luxury a couple of years ago.
Well, one thing that I've seen in, from 2018 through 2019 is the amount of collaboration among, my peers at the national labs doing new works for government programs that are kind of integrated across the government. And that's something that we've kind of all been lamenting, over the years. I made a famous statement about the government not being here last year. And I think in 2019, we all kind of stepped up, and maybe we were able to consolidate a little bit because certain things weren't happening. But the work that we're doing with Oak Ridge, P&L, Sandia, and others, at the behest of the Department of Energy or Homeland Security, in totally different sets and scales than we had been before, is really, making me, kind of happy about the kind of work that we do and we all do together.
But how about the 2021 question? Because I don't have a good answer for that, so I'm hoping you guys do. What should we be looking at in 1 year from now, January 1, 2021, we say, this is what success would look like, at least in one area that you think about?
Well, I would predict that we will see a couple of breakthroughs in technology, and this is what I hope for. And this relates to the point I just made with all the vendors. So technology will play a much bigger role in our space and our discussion than it used to have. And this, I think, should make us very optimistic, because the problem that you always have with people, when you have to rely on changing people's minds, it's like trying to move huge chunks of lead. You have to push very, very hard, and then you get pushed back, etc., etc. And this is very much different in respect to technology. We have a whole bunch of innovative companies, and I predict that we are going to see some very good breakthroughs in the next 12 and 24 months. The other thing that I predict will play a role is open source software. We are promoting open source algorithms, etc., for all products, so that you can interface, that you can do your own processing, use your own algorithms or somebody else's algorithms. That whole interconnectivity aspect, the sharing of data, I mean, we have seen it in IT, and we have also seen it in IT security. So this will shape the landscape to the better, and we don't need to focus that much on policies anymore.
Yeah, maybe I'm less of a Pollyanna than I thought, but no, I really think that it really is a slow evolution. And I don't know that I can tell you any particular metric, that I will look for, next January. But the things that have been progressing that, we used to, say just weren't happening at all or weren't happening fast enough. And like I said, whether it's on the education side, the workforce side, industry working better among themselves and with the government working among themselves. I see the trend continuing, and I think, maybe you'll see, better results of bigger projects as a result of all of that. I do have one other thing that we weren't talking about. Sure. You had one talk at the end of today, and that's kind of about manufacturing cybersecurity. We were hoping to have a big announcement of a new cybersecurity institute for manufacturing. but it still hasn't been awarded. But I think that if we're going to really take the breakthroughs of the new digital manufacturing, industry 3.0, whatever 0.0 we're on right now, cybersecurity really needs to take a foreground approach to this rather than the old bolt-ons that we used to before. With so much information being tied to these processes, we have to protect it. Otherwise, they'll be useless. And you did have one article. Speaker about that, and it was very good. The other that I was really interested in was when Klaus was talking about the European perspective. And so I think for the longest time, people here in the U.S. have been very used to kind of leading the way, NIST regulations, et cetera, et cetera. But as we learned with GDPR, if we don't start looking around the world about things, other regulations can land on us like a ton of bricks. And I think some of the things that Klaus was talking about are perhaps a little ambitious, but if they start to take off, that will impact a lot of the things that we have to do.
Yeah, but then on the other hand, can we point to a good track record of regulation other than, for example, in nuclear? So let me ask you, in the electric sector at large, is anybody happy about Newark SIP?
Yeah, come on, raise your hands. We can't see it, but we're assuming that all your hands are up.
I'm just saying, so I would be surprised if I see some hands going up. I mean, I don't know your people who you discussed this with, but I haven't heard anything good about Newark SIP, with asset owners who talk to me about the subject. So as everybody knows, regulation always has the risk that it's just going to be costly and doesn't really move the needle. And that is, by the way, what I see in Germany happening. So the German government was quick to force the electric distribution sector to become ISO 27K compliant, when still at this time nobody really knows what that would look like. So how can you make a power grid with all that technology, with all the protective relays, etc., ISO 27K compliant? I have no idea how that would work. And the other thing that you know about regulation is it will always aim it will set the bar lowest so that nobody can complain. Like, this is what you need to do. And then we have learned from experience that asset owners who you force to jump over that bar, that they will definitely not jump any higher. So that's just a fact of life, and therefore I think it was a fairly bright idea what happens in Europe and in particular in Germany. The other thing, talking about regulation at large, what really surprised me, so getting back to the United States, what really surprised me was Director Krebs' talk when he talked about all the good things that are coming from CISA, and he specifically mentioned new standards. And I was like, wait a second, did I hear that right? New standards? I think that's probably the last thing that we need. I mean, you can disagree with me, Zach, but I don't see how a new standard would help us in any way. We don't need any new standard. We know what needs to be done and how it needs to be done. We have IEC 62443 as kind of like the gold standard, and then we have the NIST CSF as the poor man's 62443. I don't think that we need anything in between, but correct me if I'm wrong.
So standards, like I say, are like models. All of them are bad, and some of them are useful, right? So. We'll see. I don't know that CISA has been involved in standards before for him to know what he's kind of saying that he wants to get into. I think he may have even mentioned regulation, which caused me to cringe even more. But I don't know whether that was a shot across the bow at industry or not. But we'll see, and we'll be there to hopefully all make it better. You talk about Newark SIP, and I remember when it first came out, and there was some very loud, sometimes squeaky voices that were coming out against Newark SIP. But I think that at some point, you have to start somewhere and hopefully progress to something better. So when you say if anyone's, people may not be happy with Newark SIP today, but they're much happier with it now than they were when it first came out, because the industry has been able to come in and mold it into something a little more positive. Every now and then, something may come in that throws it off kilter again, and then we have to do that kind of self-correcting process.
Talking about Newark SIP, so this gives me the opportunity to honor Mike Asante, who unfortunately passed away last year, way too early. And I say this really with hard feelings because we used to communicate until the very last days before his death. And you really should look up his work because Mike became famous or infamous, depending on which side you were on, by criticizing that whole Newark SIP theater. And I hope, Mike, if you can hear me, so you will appreciate that. And I'm not aware that much things have changed to the better, but you might know more about that.
And also, but thank you for bringing that up because I did want to mention that, as you know. So yeah, we did lose a great leader, mentor, and friend in Mike Asante, obviously very close to Idaho National Lab. For those of you that can, when you come out for a visit and can get into the building, we'll show you the Mike Asante conference room there in the skiff, and some of the things that we'll try to do in his honor and memory. But a lot of the things that we do in his honor and memory are work with everyone out here to make our critical infrastructure safer, and that's what he'd want us all to do. And so it's one of the original SCADA divas as well, I guess.
And he puts, I think, a couple people in their unsolicited response. They talked about the need to be welcoming to people, and you think about like Ernie, before Mike, and there are some people in this industry who really helped others come into the industry, so it's kind of incumbent on us to all do that. I want to, if we could, just tackle one other thing. I think it's quick because we didn't talk much about it, so maybe there's not much to say, but I'm curious if you think there will be something in the next year, and that's the level 1, the PLC security. I search these talks every year. I'm waiting for endpoint protection that analyzes logic before it loads. I mean, we are getting signed firmware and some things like that. Jake Brodsky had a great talk about secure coding practices in a PLC. I thought that was so, in a way, so obviously needed yet not discussed. Do either of you see that will get some attention in the next 1 to 2 years of people actually saying, how do we actually secure that level? Or are we still a few years away from that?
Well, I think that we have been doing that kind of work, and a lot of people out there. One of the things is how do we make it cost effective, en masse, right? So, the number of endpoints that we have to protect here in the U.S. that they have to protect in Europe is massive, and utilities, don't want to even calculate what the cost may be. So, how can we do some kind of at the border endpoint protection, so that way we can get some kind of economies of scale. But yeah, I think there are a lot of good concepts out there for endpoint protection, but they're just not cost feasible, I don't think.
Well, I have lost all hope in that regard. We did a project many years ago with one of the PLC vendor, with a PLC vendor. So they reached out to us to design a concept for a secure PLC, which we did, and it didn't go into production. And why? Because there was no demand, as simple as that. And so I don't think that there are some huge technical obstacles that will prevent the industry from going there. It's just that the asset owners show no appetite for this. And if you look at the big picture, it shouldn't be surprising, because if you see what's going on in respect to putting stuff in the cloud, putting SCADA systems in the cloud, putting this in the cloud and that in the cloud, all that outsourcing that's going on, it's like a totally contrarian move. And apparently this is where the money goes. Why? Because it helps the enterprise save money. So I'm pessimistic on that one, and I don't see any movement in that space. I would imagine it just to go the opposite way.
Yeah, the degree that I'm having trouble getting papers on it, that would be the bleeding edge, kind of shows me that you're right. And I think maybe one of the indicators we can look at is now you have SIP secure and Modbus secure, and the adoption rates of those. If I'm a PLC vendor and I say no one's using this, then why should I spend more money?
Just look back at S4. How many years ago did we start talking about a secure Modbus variant? Nothing.
But it exists now, so
in
I know, theory they could
but nobody's using it.
Yeah. Well, I can't blame a vendor if they offer some security at level 1. If there's not a big uptake on it, then I'd have to say, is this what my customer wants, or am I forcing them to do something?
Yeah, you don't blame the vendor, but the vendor is going to blame their marketing department.
But I
You
really
told us to do that, and
I really hope
nobody
as
is buying
we
it.
bring new infrastructures in place, we will see these engineered into the new areas. Of course, that still leaves legacy infrastructure insecure, and the interface between legacy. Like I say, the day after you buy a new system, it becomes a legacy system. And so we have to figure out how to, new systems are sexy, legacy systems are terrible, but
I'm so glad you're here. You're the voice of sunshine. You are the, so you make me feel so better. So I think that's a good place to end. So it's going to happen.
Thanks. Yeah,
okay.
It's going to happen.
Okay, well, that's good. Well, we are going to close out S4, but before we do, I just want to thank all of you for coming. Most of all, for spending your time. I know that's the most valuable thing you have is your time, and you came down here, and I really appreciate it. I would encourage you, if you have something to say, you should think about saying it on the stage next year. We put out the call for papers in June, July. It's so easy. You just send S4@digitalbond.com, three sentences, 2 sentences, and we'll start talking about it. Or if you see anything you like, or if you see anything we should put on stage, just tell me. I mean, we're really just trying to fill the best content we possibly can. And I want to thank our speakers. If you heard a talk that you really liked, tell the speaker. I got to tell you, that means a lot, having spoken at events, when someone comes up and says, I really like this, and this is what I liked about it. That's tremendous. So our speakers were great. Our sponsors, of course, we couldn't have had a lot of the parties without the sponsors. So, we thank them for making it financially viable to put on an event like this. I also, if you get a chance, I do a lot of work on S4. It's what I do now. But Liz Daly, Caitlin Daly, Elaine, and that team, you would not believe how hard they worked on this event. So if you see them, say thank you to them.
Yeah.
Thanks. And then there's a whole AV crew that's really done a great job this week. They're all behind the scenes, but we thank them as well. And just to give you a heads up, you will be getting a survey. I want to hear what you want to improve. I know some of the things already, and I'll give you one hint. You don't have to tell me about the sponsor stage. And I have some good news for you. If you saw the poster that says S421, January 26 to 28, and it says no limits, the reason for that is we will still have the main stage here. We'll still be in this facility, but we have right across the street, just on the other side of the tent, we have also contracted for that building. It has a 600-seat stage 2. So all tickets will be 3-stage tickets. We're not limited. And we also will have a real sponsor stage, not a hallway, so we'll be able to support you there. And we're going to approach this with that slogan, no limits. So we're really stepping back and saying, what would make the attendee experience better? So when you get that survey, or just email me, s4@digitalbond.com, I'd really like to hear, I like to hear good things, but I'd really like to hear what you think we could do better. And with that, if they're ready in the back, we'll close out S4 and go to the Craft Beer Bash. Thank you, guys.
All right. Good.
Please join us on stage and in the orchestra pit in front of the stage for Craft Beer and Craft Root Beer, sponsored by Kaspersky, Red Balloon Security, Rockwell Automation, and Threat Gen. There are 4 bars serving drinks, and make sure you get a pretzel.